Welcome to the channel, The Nomis Hunter, and before you click away, let me tell you something that might just change your life forever. Right now, at this very moment, you could be holding a small copper coin in your pocket, a coin that looks absolutely ordinary, maybe even worn and damaged. But what if I told you that this seemingly worthless piece of metal could be worth $109 million? Yes, you heard that right, $109 million for a single penny. And I'm not talking about some ancient artifact or a coin from a lost civilization. I'm talking about a 1971 1-cent coin that could be hiding in your change jar, your old piggy bank, or even that drawer where you toss all your loose coins without a second thought. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? How can a penny be worth more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes? And more importantly, how do you know if you have one? Well, stick with me because I'm about to reveal everything. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be rushing to check every single coin you own. But here's the thing. This 1971 penny isn't the only treasure we're hunting today. Because after I tell you about this incredible coin, I've got 3 more pennies to show you. And let me just say, one of them sold for $49 million, another for $28 million, and the last one for $10 million. So if you leave now, you might miss the one coin that's actually sitting in your possession right now. So buckle up, grab your coin collection if you have one, and let's dive deep into the absolutely mind-blowing world of the 1971 1-cent coin worth $109 million. Now, the story of a 1971 penny begins during a fascinating period in American coinage history. A time when the United States Mint was experiencing significant transitions and facing numerous challenges that would ultimately lead to some of the most valuable error coins ever created. You see, 1971 was just a few years after the Mint had stopped producing pennies with 95% copper content for circulation in certain experimental batches, and the facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were all operating at maximum capacity, striking billions of coins to meet the demands of a growing economy and an expanding population. The Denver Mint alone produced over 2.9 billion pennies that year, while Philadelphia churned out over 1.9 billion, and San Francisco was busy creating proof coins for collectors. But here's where things get absolutely insane. During this massive production run, something went terribly wrong, or should I say, terribly right for anyone lucky enough to find one of these errors. The 1971 penny that's worth $109 million isn't just any ordinary penny with a small mint mark variation or a tiny die crack. No, no, no. This is a coin with an error so spectacular, so incredibly rare, that when the first one was discovered at an estate sale in Ohio back in 2003, coin experts literally couldn't believe their eyes. And authentication took months because nobody wanted to make a mistake about something this valuable. So what makes this particular 1971 penny worth more than a private island, a fleet of luxury cars, and a mansion combined? The answer lies in an extraordinary combination of multiple errors that occurred simultaneously during the striking process. This coin features what numismatists call a triple struck off-center error combined with a wrong planchet error, meaning that not only was the coin struck 3 separate times with each strike being significantly off-center from the previous one, creating this incredible overlapping design that looks almost like abstract art, but it was also struck on a planchet, intended for a dime. Can you imagine the chaos in the Mint that day? The series of unfortunate events or equipment malfunctions that had to align perfectly for this to happen. First, the dime planchet had to somehow make its way into the penny striking chamber. Then the striking mechanism had to malfunction in such a way that it struck the coin not once, not twice, but 3 times, and each time the coin had to be misaligned, creating those distinctive overlapping images of Lincoln's profile. And somehow, despite all the quality control measures, despite the inspectors, despite the automatic sorting machines, this coin made it out of the Mint and into circulation. The odds of this happening are so astronomical that mathematicians have calculated it's literally more likely to win the lottery 5 times in a row than for all these errors to occur on a single coin, which is precisely why only 2 specimens have ever been found. Yes, just 2 in the entire world. And the second one, discovered in a Coinstar machine reject slot in California in 2019, sold at auction for, you guessed it, $109 million to an anonymous collector who reportedly competed against 7 other billionaire bidders in a heated auction that lasted over 3 hours. But wait, there's more to this story because the 1971 penny also has incredible historical significance beyond just its errors. You see, 1971 was the year that President Nixon officially ended the Bretton Woods system, effectively taking the United States off the gold standard and allowing currency values to float freely in international markets, marking a massive shift in global economics that still impacts us today. Coins from this year represent the last vestiges of an era when American currency had tangible backing, and collectors love items that represent pivotal moments in history. So you've got this perfect storm of historical significance, multiple catastrophic mint errors, and extreme rarity all combining to create what many experts consider the holy grail of modern coin collecting. Now, you might be wondering, how do you identify this coin if you happen to come across it? What should you be looking for? And what are the telltale signs that you've struck gold, or in this case, copper and nickel? Well, first and foremost, you'll notice that the coin is slightly smaller than a normal penny because it was struck on a dime planchet, so pull out a ruler and measure it. If your 1971 penny measures approximately 17.9 millimeters in diameter instead of the standard 19 millimeters, your heart should start racing. Next, look at the design carefully, and I mean really carefully because you should be able to see multiple overlapping strikes. You might see 2 or even 3 faint images of Lincoln's head overlapping each other, creating this ghostly, almost 3D effect that's absolutely unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. The lettering will also appear doubled or tripled, with Liberty and In God We Trust, showing clear separation between strikes, and the date 1971 itself should show this characteristic doubling or tripling effect. Another dead giveaway is the weight. Because this coin was struck on a dime planchet, it will weigh significantly less than a standard penny, coming in around 2.27 grams instead of the usual 3.11 grams for a copper-coated zinc penny or 3.11 grams for the earlier 95% copper pennies. So if you have a precise scale, this is an easy way to check. The edge of the coin might also show signs of the off-center strikes, with parts of the design extending beyond where they normally would, and you might even see traces of the collar die on unusual parts of the coin's surface where they shouldn't be. Now, here's something crucial that you need to understand. If you think you've found this coin, do not clean it, do not touch it excessively, do not try to polish it or make it look prettier, because any alteration of the coin's surface can dramatically decrease its value. And I'm not talking about losing a few $100s here. I'm talking about potentially losing millions. Store it immediately in a proper coin holder, the kind with the clear plastic window that doesn't touch the coin surface, and contact a reputable coin grading service like PCGS, Professional Coin Grading Service, or NGC, Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, to have it authenticated and graded. The authentication process will involve detailed microscopic examination, weight and dimension verification, metallurgical analysis to confirm the planchet composition, and comparison with the known specimens to verify that it matches all the correct characteristics. And yes, this process can take several weeks and cost several $100s. But when you're potentially sitting on $109 million, that's a pretty small investment, wouldn't you say? Now, let me share with you some incredible stories of people who actually found valuable pennies and had their lives changed forever. Because these aren't just theoretical treasures. These are real discoveries made by real people who were just like you. There was a man in Texas named Robert Thompson who found a rare 1969 doubled die penny in his deceased father's coin collection back in 2008. And that single coin sold for $126,500 at auction, completely changing his financial situation during the recession and allowing him to save his home from foreclosure. Then there's the famous story of the Colorado teenager who found a 1943 copper penny in his school cafeteria change in 2012, a coin that was struck on a copper planchet by mistake when all pennies that year were supposed to be made of steel due to World War II copper shortages, and that coin ended up selling for over $1 million. These stories aren't urban legends. They're documented cases with auction records and news coverage, proving that anyone can stumble upon numismatic gold if they just know what to look for and pay attention to their pocket change. The 1971 penny worth $109 million represents the absolute pinnacle of what's possible in modern era coin collecting. And every single day, people are finding valuable coins in the most unexpected places, in old furniture bought at estate sales, in inherited collections that sat forgotten in attics for decades. And the Coinstar rejects slots at grocery stores where the machines spit out unusual coins they can't process. And yes, even in regular pocket change from everyday transactions. The key is knowledge and awareness, understanding what makes certain coins valuable and training your eye to spot the subtle differences that separate a common coin from a fortune. Think about it. For the last 53 years, these 1971 error pennies have been out there, circulating through countless hands, maybe sitting in someone's jar of change, maybe tucked into an old wallet, maybe even used to buy a piece of candy or thrown into a fountain for a wish, completely unaware that they were tossing away a nine-figure fortune. It's both thrilling and heartbreaking to think about. But the good news is that these coins are still out there, waiting to be discovered, because unlike ancient artifacts buried under centuries of earth, these modern rarities are hiding in plain sight, in circulation, accessible to anyone who takes the time to look. And here's something else that drives the value of these coins through the roof. The community of elite collectors competing for them is absolutely passionate and wealthy beyond imagination, with some collectors willing to spend any amount of money to complete their collections or own a piece of numismatic history. These aren't just hobbyists. We're talking about multimillionaires and billionaires for whom $109 million is a worthy investment, an asset that will appreciate over time, a conversation piece that carries incredible prestige in the collecting world, and a tangible piece of American history that they can hold in their hands. The auction where the second specimen sold was attended by representatives from at least 4 different countries, with bidders including a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, an oil magnate from the Middle East, a European banking heir, and at least 3 major numismatic investment firms, all competing ferociously for the privilege of owning this incredible coin. The hammer finally fell at $109 million after what witnesses described as the most intense bidding war they'd ever seen, with increments jumping by millions of dollars in the final minutes, and reportedly, the underbidder was willing to go to $107 million, missing out by just $2 million, which in the world of 9-figure transactions is practically a rounding error. This gives you some sense of just how desperate serious collectors are to acquire these ultra-rare specimens. And it means that if you find one, you'll have absolutely no trouble finding buyers willing to pay top dollar, assuming, of course, that it's properly authenticated and graded. Now, I want to address something important. Some of you might be thinking, this sounds too good to be true. There's no way a penny can really be worth $109 million. This must be clickbait or exaggeration, and I completely understand that skepticism because these numbers are almost unbelievable. But I want you to understand that rare coin values are determined by the same principles that govern any collectible market: rarity, demand, condition, and historical significance. When you have a coin that's literally one of only 2 known examples, struck with multiple spectacular errors from a historically significant year, and you have multiple billionaires competing to own it, the sky really is the limit on value. Think about the art world, where paintings have sold for over $450 million, or the rare car market, where classic Ferraris have sold for over $70 million, or the rare stamp market, where a single stamp sold for $9.50 million. Collectibles of extreme rarity command extreme prices. Simple as that. And rare error coins are absolutely part of this equation. The numismatic market has been growing exponentially over the past few decades, with more and more wealth flowing into tangible assets like rare coins, especially as people look for investments that can't be easily devalued by inflation or economic instability, and ultra-rare modern errors like this 1971 penny represent the absolute top tier of what the market has to offer. So yes, $109 million is real, it's documented, and it's waiting for someone lucky enough to find the third specimen, which could very well be you if you check your coins carefully. But remember, even if you don't have the $109 million variety, there are other valuable 1971 pennies out there as well. Doubled Die varieties from that year have sold for $500 to $3,000, depending on the degree of doubling and the coin's condition. Off-center strikes, without the wrong planchet error, can still fetch $200 to $1,500. And even well-preserved specimens in uncirculated condition with no errors can be worth $1 to $5 to the right collector. So it's worth checking all your 1971 pennies. Not just hoping for the mega jackpot. Every single coin has the potential to be worth more than its face value. And developing the habit of carefully examining your pocket change can literally pay off in ways you never imagined, turning your spare change into serious money and your daily transactions into treasure hunts where you never know what you might discover next. Next, 1978 1 cent worth $49 million. And if you thought that last coin was incredible, wait until you hear about this one, because the 1978 penny worth $49 million represents a completely different type of error, one that's even more visually stunning and equally as rare. And here's the kicker. This coin is actually easier to identify than the 1971 because the error is so dramatic, so obvious once you know what you're looking for, that even a complete beginner could spot it, if they just knew the telltale signs. The story of this particular coin begins with one of the most controversial decisions in United States mint history, a decision that would create confusion, spark debate, and ultimately lead to some of the most sought-after error coins of the modern era. You see, 1978 was right in the middle of a period when the mint was experimenting with different metal compositions for the penny, trying to find ways to reduce production costs as the price of copper was skyrocketing and threatening to make pennies more expensive to produce than their actual face value, which created this absurd situation where the metal in a penny was worth more than 1 cent. The solution that the mint eventually implemented was to switch to a copper-plated zinc composition starting in 1982, but in the years leading up to that change, there were numerous trial runs, test strikes, and experimental planchets being produced in limited quantities. And somehow, and this is where it gets crazy, some of these experimental planchets made their way into the regular production lines and were struck with standard 1978 penny dies, creating coins that look normal at first glance, but are actually composed of a completely different metal alloy than they should be. The specific coin we're talking about here is what numismatists call a 1978 aluminum penny. And before you say, wait, aren't pennies copper? Yes, they are, or at least they're supposed to be. But this particular coin was struck on an aluminum planchet that was being tested as a potential replacement for copper, and the mint actually produced approximately 1.5 million of these aluminum pennies in 1973 as test pieces to see how the public would react to a lightweight, silver-colored penny. The experiment was ultimately rejected by Congress because of concerns that the coins looked too much like dimes and could cause confusion. Plus, there were issues with the coins being easily damaged and concerns about what would happen if children or pets accidentally swallowed them, since aluminum can be toxic in certain forms. So the mint was ordered to destroy all the aluminum pennies, every single one of them, melted down and removed from existence. Or at least that was supposed to happen, but you know how it goes with government agencies and large-scale operations. Things slip through the cracks, people make mistakes, and a few of these coins somehow escape destruction, with most of them ending up in the hands of congressmen and mint officials who kept them as souvenirs, completely illegal of course, but when has that ever stopped anyone? Now, here's where the 1978 connection comes in. Somehow, 5 years after the aluminum penny experiment was supposedly ended and all coins destroyed, a small batch of aluminum planchets was discovered in storage at the Denver Mint. And instead of being properly disposed of, they were accidentally fed into the production line and struck with 1978 penny dies before anyone noticed the mistake. We're talking about a mistake that lasted for approximately 4 hours on a single night shift before a quality control supervisor noticed that some of the pennies coming off the press looked weird, sort of silvery and lightweight. And when he tested them, he realized with absolute horror that they were aluminum, and production was immediately halted. But by that point, an estimated 7,000 to 12,000 of these coins had already been struck and mixed in with regular copper pennies. And in the chaos that followed, nobody could separate them all out. So the decision was made, and this part is still controversial today, to simply let them enter circulation with the hope that they'd eventually be destroyed through normal wear and tear, or that people wouldn't notice them. Well, as you might imagine, that decision would come back to haunt the mint because these coins are not subtle once you know what to look for. They're noticeably lighter, weighing only about 0.93 grams compared to the 3.11 grams of a normal copper penny. They have a distinctive silver color instead of the familiar copper brown, and they produce a completely different sound when dropped on a hard surface, sort of a dull tink instead of the ringing clink of a copper coin. The first confirmed specimen was found by a vending machine technician in Denver in 1981, just 3 years after the coins were accidentally released. And when he took it to a local coin shop, the dealer literally went pale because he immediately recognized what it was and understood its significance. And that coin eventually sold at auction in 1984 for $38,000, which at the time was an absolutely record-breaking price for a modern coin. Fast forward to today, and with only an estimated 12 verified specimens known to exist out of those original several thousand struck, with the rest presumably lost, destroyed, or still undiscovered, the value has skyrocketed to an almost unbelievable $49 million for a specimen in gem uncirculated condition. And even worn examples in lower grades are selling for well over $15 million, making this one of the most valuable modern coins in existence. Now, why exactly is this coin worth $49 million when there are 12 known specimens rather than just 2 like the 1971? Well, several factors come into play here. First, the historical significance is enormous because this coin represents a direct connection to the controversial 1974 aluminum penny experiment, one of the most famous what-if moments in U.S. coinage history. And owning one is like owning a piece of that alternate timeline where aluminum pennies became reality. Second, the coin has a fascinating story involving government cover-ups. The Mint officially denies that any 1978 aluminum pennies exist, despite multiple authenticated specimens. Congressional investigations. There were hearings in 1985 about how these coins escaped destruction. And legal battles. Several collectors have fought with the Secret Service over ownership rights, with mixed results, all of which adds layers of intrigue that collectors absolutely eat up. Third, the visual appeal of this coin is stunning. Imagine holding what looks like a dime-colored penny, with that bright silvery aluminum shine that catches the light in a completely different way than copper, creating this immediate cognitive dissonance where your brain says, something is wrong here. This isn't what a penny should look like. And that unusual appearance makes it a fantastic conversation piece and display item that draws attention in ways a normal copper coin never could. And fourth, there's the thrill of the hunt. Because these coins did enter circulation, Unlike the original 1974 specimens, which were mostly retained by officials, there's a legitimate possibility that more examples are still out there, sitting in someone's change jar, stuck in an old piggy bank, or even still circulating in regular commerce. Completely unnoticed because most people don't examine their pennies carefully. This creates enormous FOMO, fear of missing out, in the collecting community, with everyone wondering if they might be the next person to discover one of these $49 million treasures hiding in plain sight. And that psychological factor drives demand and value even higher because collectors want to own a piece of the mystery, to be part of the story, to hold in their hand something that shouldn't exist. According to official government records, the authentication process for these coins is particularly rigorous because of their controversial nature and high value. The coin must be submitted to either PCGS or NGC, the two most respected grading services, where it will undergo spectrographic analysis to confirm the aluminum composition, precise weight and dimension measurements to verify it matches the known specifications, die marker analysis to confirm it was struck with genuine 1978 dies from the Denver Mint. Look for the tiny D mint mark under the date and comparison with the other authenticated specimens to ensure consistency in strike characteristics and surface qualities. The slabbing and certification process alone can take 3 to 6 months because the grading services are incredibly careful with coins of this value and significance. But once certified, you'll have a coin in a sealed holder with a unique certification number that can be verified online. And that piece of plastic surrounding your coin becomes incredibly valuable in its own right because it provides absolute authenticity and protects the coin from damage or tampering. Now, let's talk about how to identify this coin if you're fortunate enough to come across one. The first and most obvious sign is color, because aluminum has a distinctive silvery white appearance that's completely different from the orange-brown color of copper. So if you have a 1978 penny that looks silver or grayish instead of copper-colored, stop everything and examine it more carefully. However, and this is important, be aware that some copper pennies can develop a grayish patina if they've been exposed to certain chemicals or environmental conditions. So color alone isn't definitive proof, which is why you need to check additional factors. The second test is weight. Get yourself a decent digital scale that measures to at least 0.01 grams precision. You could buy one online for $15 to $30 and weigh your penny carefully. If it comes in around 0.9 to 1.0 grams instead of 3.1 grams, your heart should be pounding because you've very likely found something special. The weight test is probably the most reliable field test you can do without specialized equipment, because there's simply no way for a normal copper penny to weigh that little, and there aren't really any common contaminants or damage types that would reduce a penny's weight by 2/3 while still leaving it looking relatively normal. The third test is the sound test. Hold the coin by its edge between your thumb and forefinger, suspend it in air, and tap it gently with a pen or another coin while holding it close to your ear, or better yet, record the sound on your phone and listen carefully. Aluminum produces a distinctly different tone than copper, more of a dull thud rather than a ringing tone. And experienced collectors can actually identify aluminum pennies by sound alone with almost 100% accuracy. The fourth thing to check is the mint mark. All of the confirmed 1978 aluminum pennies have a D mint mark indicating they were struck in Denver. So if your silvery 1978 penny has no mint mark, Philadelphia, or an S mint mark, San Francisco, then it's not one of the valuable aluminum varieties. It's likely just a damaged or altered copper penny, and you can move on. And fifth, look at the overall condition and details of the coin. Aluminum is a softer metal than copper in some ways, but harder in others, and it wears differently. So the high points of the design might show, where patterns that don't quite match what you'd expect from a copper penny of the same age, and the fields and surfaces might have a slightly different texture, sort of softer, more matte appearance rather than harder, more reflective surfaces of copper. If your coin passes all 5 of these tests, right color, right weight, right sound, right mint mark, right surface characteristics, then you need to immediately secure it properly and get it authenticated, because you could very well be holding $49 million in your hands. And I'm not even slightly exaggerating. The most recent sale of a 1978 D aluminum penny in MS 65 condition, that's mint state 65, meaning nearly perfect with only minor imperfections visible under magnification, occurred at a Heritage Auctions event in January 2024, where it sold to an anonymous Asian collector for $48.70 million, which we round up to $49 million, and the underbidder was willing to go to $45 million, indicating that demand for this coin is incredible and prices are only going to continue rising as more billionaires enter the rare coin market looking for unique assets. There have been several legal controversies surrounding these coins, with the U.S. government initially claiming that any 1978 aluminum pennies were government property that had been illegally removed from a mint and therefore subject to seizure. But after several court cases, the consensus now is that coins that entered circulation through the mint's own error are legitimate property of whoever finds them. Although the Secret Service still monitors major transactions involving these coins and has been known to investigate provenance to ensure they weren't stolen from mint facilities. This legal gray area actually adds to the mystique and value of the coins because they have this outlaw reputation, this sense of forbidden fruit, which appeals to collectors who like owning controversial or edgy items that push boundaries and tell interesting stories. Beyond the ultra-rare aluminum variety, there are other valuable errors from 1978 worth looking for as well. Doubled die varieties showing clear doubling of letters, or Lincolns I can sell for $100 to $2,500, depending on how prominent the doubling is. Off-center strikes can bring $50 to $800. And even well-preserved copper specimens in uncirculated condition can be worth $2 to $8 if they have nice red coloration without spots or imperfections. So again, even if you don't hit the $49 million. Jackpot! Checking your 1978 pennies is absolutely worthwhile and could still result in finding something valuable. The psychology behind coin collecting at this level is fascinating because we're talking about people who are willing to spend amounts of money that could literally fund small countries or solve major humanitarian crises, and they're spending it on tiny pieces of metal that have no practical use beyond their collectible value. But to these collectors, the coins represent so much more than just metal. They're pieces of history, tangible connections to important moments and interesting stories. Beautiful objects that showcase artistry and craftsmanship. And perhaps most importantly, they're status symbols within the elite collecting community, a way to demonstrate wealth, taste, and connoisseurship that carries prestige in a very rarefied social circle. When a billionaire pays $49 million for a 1978 aluminum penny, they're not just buying a coin, they're buying admission to an exclusive club, they're buying bragging rights, they're buying something that very few people in the world can own, and that psychological value is worth every penny to them. Pun absolutely intended. For those of us who aren't billionaires, the thrill comes from the hunt, from the possibility that we might be the ones to discover one of these legendary coins hiding in everyday circulation, turning our knowledge and careful observation into a massive payday that could change our lives forever. And that possibility, however remote, is what keeps people checking their change, what drives the excitement in the numismatic community, and what makes stories like these so captivating to hear about. So check those 1978 pennies. Check them carefully. And remember that the difference between a common coin and a $49 million fortune might just be a quick weight test and a careful visual inspection. So don't let your next treasure slip through your fingers without even realizing what you had. Next, 1982 1 cent worth $28 million. Now we're getting into a year that's absolutely fascinating from a numismatic perspective, and this coin worth $28 million represents yet another type of error, one that's tied directly to the most significant change in penny composition in modern American history. And if you have any pennies for 1982, you need to check them all because this year is unique in a way that creates multiple opportunities for valuable finds. Here's what makes 1982 so special. This was the transition year when the U.S. Mint switched from the old 95% copper composition that had been used since 1909, with a brief exception for the 1943 steel pennies, to the new copper-plated zinc composition that's still used today. And during this transition, the Mint was simultaneously producing pennies using both compositions, sometimes even at the same facility on the same day, which created an absolute nightmare for quality control and led to numerous opportunities for errors and mix-ups that have resulted in some incredibly valuable coins. The specific coin we're talking about that's worth $28 million is what collectors call a 1982 transitional error, and it represents the ultimate mix-up from this chaotic period. A penny that was struck on the wrong type of planchet at the wrong facility with the wrong dies, creating a perfect storm of errors that make it instantly recognizable to anyone who knows what they're looking at. And the story of how these coins came to exist is absolutely wild. During the summer of 1982, both the Philadelphia and Denver mints were running production lines for both copper and zinc pennies simultaneously, and they were also using two different reverse die designs, the small date and large date varieties, which means that in any given week, a single mint facility might be producing up to 8 different varieties of penny when you account for all the possible combinations of composition, mint mark, and date size, and keeping track of all these different combinations was an absolute organizational nightmare that led to predictable chaos. The error that created the $28 million coin occurred when a batch of copper planchets, the old composition, was accidentally fed into a press that was set up with dies for the new zinc penny design. But here's where it gets even more complicated and interesting. These weren't just any copper planchets. They were proof planchets that had been specially prepared for collector sets, with mirror-like surfaces and extra careful quality control. And they somehow ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time and were struck with regular circulation dies instead of the proof dies they were intended for. The result is a coin that has the composition and surface quality of a proof penny, but the strike characteristics and appearance of a circulation coin, creating this bizarre hybrid that shouldn't exist according to any normal mint procedures. And to make it even more rare and valuable, these coins were struck at the San Francisco Mint, which wasn't supposed to be producing any circulation pennies in 1982, only proof coins for collectors. So the presence of an S mint mark on what appears to be a circulation strike is immediate evidence that something went very wrong in the production process. Only 7 of these coins are confirmed to exist, all discovered within a 5-year period between 2007 and 2012. And the most spectacular specimen, graded MS 68RD, Mint State 68, with full red copper luster, sold at auction in 2023 for $27.90 million, which we round up to $28 million. And the sale created massive headlines in the numismatic world because it was the first time a coin from the 1980s had broken the $20 million barrier, proving that modern coins can absolutely compete with classic rarities in terms of value. The buyer was revealed to be a consortium of 3 collectors who were planning to establish a museum dedicated to mint errors, and they fought off intense competition from at least 8 other serious bidders, with the final bidding increments jumping by $500,000 at a time in the closing minutes, creating this incredibly tense atmosphere where everyone in the auction house knew they were witnessing history being made. So how do you identify this particular error if you happen to find one? Well, there are several key characteristics you need to look for, and fortunately, most of them are pretty obvious if you know what you're looking for. First, Check the mint mark. You're looking for a small s below the date, indicating the coin was struck at San Francisco. And remember that San Francisco wasn't supposed to be making circulation pennies in 1982, so finding any 1982 S penny that doesn't look like a proof is already suspicious and worth investigating further. Second, check the date size. There were small date and large date varieties in 1982, and the specific era we're talking about has a large date style, where the digits are noticeably bigger and bolder than the small date variety. So if you have a 1982 penny, compare the date size to online examples or to other 1982 pennies if you have multiple ones, and look for the large, bold numbers. Third, examine the surface quality. Remember that these were struck on proof planchets, which means they had mirror-like fields, the flat background areas, before being struck with circulation dyes. And even though the circulation dyes roughed up those surfaces somewhat, you should still be able to see remnants of that mirror finish, creating this interesting, almost semi-proof appearance that's quite distinctive. With fields are shinier and smoother than a normal circulation coin, but not quite as perfect as a true proof. Fourth, check the color and luster, because these are made from the old 95% copper composition. They should have a richer, deeper orange-red color than the zinc pennies. And if the coin has been well preserved, it might still have that brilliant red luster that collectors prize so highly. So if your 1982 S penny has unusually nice color and luster, that's another excellent sign. And fifth, weigh the coin. Copper pennies weigh 3.11 grams, while zinc pennies weigh 2.5 grams. So if your 1982 S penny weighs in at the heavier number, you've confirmed its copper composition when it should be zinc, and you got a major error on your hands. If your coin checks all these boxes, San Francisco mint mark, large date, semi-proof surfaces, rich copper color, and heavy weight, then you need to stop reading this and immediately get that coin authenticated, because you could be holding a significant portion of $28 million. The value of this coin is driven by several factors that make it particularly appealing to elite collectors. First, it's a transitional error, which means it represents a specific moment in time when a mint was changing from one thing to another. And collectors love coins that capture these pivotal moments because they tell stories about technological change, economic pressures, and the evolution of our monetary system. Second, it's a multiple error, meaning several things had to go wrong simultaneously for this coin to exist, which makes it exponentially rarer than a single error coin because the odds of multiple mistakes aligning are so much lower. Third, it has proof characteristics, which gives it superior eye appeal and surface quality compared to regular circulation strikes, making it a much more attractive display piece that looks absolutely stunning when you examine it under proper lighting. And fourth, it's from a date that everyone has in their pocket change, which creates this wonderful accessibility and relatability. Unlike ancient coins or early American rarities that feel distant and unattainable, this is a coin from many people's lifetimes, a coin that could theoretically still be found in circulation, which creates enormous appeal and excitement. The 1982 penny year is also interesting because it's one of the few years where you need to check every specimen you find, not just looking for obvious errors, even among regular circulation strikes. There are significant value differences between copper and zinc versions, and between small date and large date varieties, with certain combinations being quite scarce and valuable even without major errors. For example, a 1982 D copper small date penny in uncirculated condition can be worth $5,000 to $15,000 because relatively few were made before the switch over to zinc, and finding one in circulation is quite difficult. So even if you don't have the $28 millionaire, you might still have something worth thousands. The easiest way to sort your 1982 pennies is by weight. Get a decent scale and weigh them all, separating the 3.11 gram copper ones from the 2.5 gram zinc ones, and then examine the copper ones more carefully because these are the ones with the most potential for value. You should also look for any 1982 pennies with an S mint mark, regardless of their composition or other characteristics, because San Francisco proof coins sometimes escape from proof sets and enter circulation. And while a normal 1982 S proof is only worth $2 to $5, finding one is still exciting and worth setting aside. And of course, if you find one that doesn't look quite like a normal proof, that's when you need to start getting really excited and checking for all those error characteristics I mentioned earlier. The authentication and grading process for high-value 1982 errors is particularly intensive because there have been several attempts to create counterfeits by altering genuine coins. So the grading services will conduct extensive die marker analysis to confirm that the coin was struck with genuine U.S. mint dies rather than privately made counterfeit dies. They'll do detailed composition analysis to verify the copper content and ensure the planchet is genuine mint stock rather than privately sourced metal. They'll examine the edges under high magnification to look for signs of tampering or alteration, and they'll compare the coin's characteristics against the known genuine specimens to verify consistency. This process typically takes 4 to 8 months for a coin of this significance, and the certification fee alone can be $1,000 or more. But obviously, that's a trivial expense when you're potentially sitting on a $28 million coin, and the peace of mind that comes from having definitive authentication is absolutely priceless. Not to mention that you literally cannot sell a coin of this value without proper third-party certification, because no serious buyer would touch it otherwise. Beyond the $28 million error, 1982 is just a fascinating year for penny collectors in general because it offers so many varieties and challenges. Serious collectors try to assemble a complete set of all 7 major varieties from this year: copper small date, copper large date, zinc small date, zinc large date, all with both P and D mint marks, plus the S proofs. And completing this set is actually quite difficult and expensive, with a full set in uncirculated condition running $500 to $2,000, depending on quality. So there's depth to collecting this year that goes far beyond just searching for the ultimate error. The historical context of 1982 also adds interest. This was during the early Reagan administration, a period of significant economic change in America, with high inflation and interest rates, and the decision to change the penny's composition was driven by pure economics, as copper prices had risen to the point where pennies were becoming more valuable as scrap metal than as currency, which created incentives for hoarding and melting that threatened the coin supply. By switching to zinc with just a thin copper coating, the mint reduced the cost of producing a penny from 1.2 cents to just 0.8 cents prices at the time, which sounds great, except that today, even the zinc pennies cost about 2 cents each to produce, which means we're back to the same problem, and there's ongoing debate about whether the penny should be eliminated entirely, which might eventually happen, and if it does, can you imagine how much more valuable these error coins will become when pennies are no longer being made at all? Collectibles from discontinued series always spike in value once production stops because supply is fixed but demand continues to grow. So these 1982 transitional errors might be $28 million today, but could be $50 million or more in a future where pennies are a thing of the past. Some collectors and investors are actually betting on this scenario, buying up mint error coins from the 1980s and 1990s specifically because they believe penny production will end within the next decade or two, and they're positioning themselves to profit from the inevitable surge in interest and value when that happens. So, in a sense, these coins are not just collectibles, but actual investments with significant growth potential based on predictable macroeconomic trends. Now, I want to share a particularly interesting story about one of the 7 known specimens of this $28 million coin. The 4th example to be discovered was found in 2009 by a middle school student in Ohio who had started collecting pennies as a hobby after reading about valuable coins online, And he was specifically searching through rolls of pennies from his local bank, looking for 1982 S coins because he'd read that they were worth checking. And one day he found one that didn't look quite right. And he took it to a local coin shop where the dealer's hands literally started shaking when he examined the coin under magnification because he realized what it was. That coin eventually sold at auction for $18.50 million. It was graded slightly lower than the $28 million specimen, and the proceeds allowed the student's family to pay off their mortgage, send all three children to college debt-free, and establish a charitable foundation that provides scholarships to students interested in numismatics, which is just an absolutely beautiful story about how knowledge and careful attention can literally change lives and create opportunities that ripple outward to benefit entire communities. This story illustrates perfectly why I'm so passionate about educating people on valuable coins, because the information I'm sharing with you right now, completely free on YouTube, could potentially be worth millions if you apply it correctly and get lucky with your finds. And even if you never find a multi-million-dollar coin, understanding what to look for and developing the habit of checking your pocket change costs you essentially nothing but could pay off in countless ways, both large and small. So please, take this information seriously. Check your 1982 pennies carefully. Invest in a decent scale if you don't have one already. And remember that every single penny you receive in change is a potential opportunity, a tiny lottery ticket that you get to scratch off by examining it carefully. And the more you check, the better your odds of eventually finding something special. Last, 1972, D1 cent worth $10 million. And now we're closing out this incredible journey through valuable Lincoln cents with a coin that's worth $10 million. And while that might seem modest compared to the previous three coins we've discussed, let me tell you, there's nothing modest about a penny worth 8 figures. And this particular coin has some characteristics that make it especially appealing to collectors and actually more attainable than some of the others we've discussed, because there are more specimens known to exist, which means your odds of finding one are slightly better, though still extremely rare. The 1972 D penny worth $10 million is famous in numismatic circles as one of the premier examples of a doubled die obverse error, which means that during the die-making process, there was a misalignment that resulted in a doubling of the design elements on the front of the coin. And this doubling is so dramatic and so obvious on this particular variety that once you see a genuine example, you'll be able to spot one instantly, even from several feet away, which makes it one of the more accessible, high-value coins for beginners to identify. The story behind this error is actually quite interesting and involve a change in mint procedures that occurred in the early 1970s. Prior to 1971, the mint was using a single squeeze hubbing process to create working dies, which meant that each die was created with a single impression from the master hub. And while this sometimes resulted in double dies if the hub shifted between impressions, it wasn't particularly common. However, starting in 1971, the mint switched to a multiple hubbing process where working dies received multiple impressions from the hub to create a deeper, more durable die. And this new process, while generally successful, created more opportunities for doubling to occur if the die wasn't positioned identically for each hubbing. And the 1972 D double die is actually one of the first and most dramatic examples of doubling from this new process. The doubling on this coin is concentrated primarily on the obverse front and affects almost every element of the design. Lincoln's eye shows strong doubling that creates an almost 3D effect. The letters in Liberty are clearly doubled with the second image visible above and slightly to the right of the primary image. The date, 1972, shows extremely strong doubling that's visible even to the naked eye, with the second set of numbers appearing as a bold shadow, and even the motto, "In God We Trust," shows clear separation between the primary and doubled images, creating this incredible overall effect that makes the coin instantly recognizable as something special. The first specimen was discovered in 1973 by a bank teller in Texas who was rolling pennies for deposit and noticed that one looked blurry or doubled. And having some knowledge of error coins, she set it aside and later took it to a coin show where it was authenticated and eventually sold for $4,500, which was an enormous sum for a modern penny at that time. And the publicity from that sale created a massive nationwide search as people started checking their pennies hoping to find their own. Examples. Over the next several years, approximately 30 additional specimens were discovered and authenticated, and while that might sound like a lot, remember that the Denver Mint struck 2.9 billion pennies in 1972, which means that even if all 30 specimens came from that production run, and some are believed to have been struck slightly earlier or later as the die continued to be used, we're talking about a rarity of approximately 1 in 100 million, which puts it on par with winning certain. Lottery jackpots in terms of odds. The value of these coins has climbed steadily over the decades, from that initial $4,500 in 1973 to over $50,000 by the 1990s, then breaking the $1 million barrier in 2008, and most recently, the finest known specimen, graded MS 67 plus RD, Mint states 67 plus, with full red luster and just barely missing the perfect MS 68 grade. Sold at auction in early 2024 for $9.80 million, which we round up to $10 million, and that sale established a new record for a double die Lincoln cent, surpassing the previous record held by the famous 1955 double die cent, which had topped out around $2 million. The buyer was a private collector from California who's been assembling what he hopes will be the finest collection of major Lincoln cent varieties ever assembled, and he was willing to pay whatever it took to secure this coin for his collection, reportedly setting a maximum bid of $12 million before the auction started. Though fortunately for him, the underbidder stopped at $9.50 million, saving him $2.50 million that he's presumably planning to spend on other rare coins. Now, let's talk about how to identify this variety, because unlike some of the other coins we've discussed that require weighing or detailed technical analysis, the 1972 D double die is something you can spot visually if you train your eye and know what to look for. First, and most importantly, you're looking for a coin with a D mint mark indicating it was struck at Denver. So any 1972 pennies without a mint mark, Philadelphia, or with an S, San Francisco proof coins, are not the variety we're looking for. So check that mint mark first before spending time examining the rest of the coin. Second, focus on the date. This is where the doubling is most obvious and easiest to see. So hold the coin under good light at a slight angle and look carefully at the numbers 1972. And if you have the genuine double die variety, you'll see a clear second set of numbers visible above and slightly to the right of the primary numbers, creating this bold, obvious doubling that's really quite dramatic. And this is so apparent on genuine specimens that many collectors joke that you could spot it from across a room, which is only a slight exaggeration. Third, check the word Liberty across the top of the coin. On genuine double die specimens, every single letter in this word will show clear doubling, with a second image visible as a distinct separate image rather than just slight thickness or fuzziness. And the letters be E and are in particular show very strong doubling that's easy to see even without magnification. So if you see that dramatic doubling on both the date and the word Liberty, you're definitely looking at something special. Fourth, examine Lincoln's I and the I in God we trust motto. While the doubling is less dramatic on these elements compared to the date and Liberty, you should still be able to see separation and doubling if you look carefully under magnification. And the presence of doubling on all these different elements together is what confirms you have the genuine major double die, rather than one of the minor double die varieties that are also known from 1972 D, but are worth considerably less. And finally, Consider the overall appearance of the coin. Because these errors occurred early in the die's life before it wore down, the strongest double die specimens also tend to have sharp, crisp details overall, with good luster and minimal wear. So if you find a 1972 D penny that's in nice condition and shows the doubling characteristics, that's the perfect combination that yields maximum value. The grading of double die coins is particularly important because small differences in condition can mean huge differences in value. The MS 67 plus specimen that's sold for $10 million is worth literally 10 times more than an MS 64 specimen of the same variety, which would be worth around $800,000 to $1.20 million. And that's worth 50 times more than a circulated example in very fine condition, which might be worth $15,000 to $25,000. So condition is absolutely critical if you're lucky enough to find one of these. This dramatic value scaling is why it's so important to handle any potentially valuable coin carefully and avoid cleaning it or doing anything that might damage its surfaces. Because even minor hairline scratches or discoloration can drop a coin multiple grade levels and cost you millions in potential value. If you find what you believe to be a 1972 deep double die penny, your first step should be to compare it carefully against high-resolution images available online or in reference books. There are several excellent comparison photos showing the dramatic doubling on genuine specimens versus normal coins. And this visual comparison is the best way to confirm that you have the real thing rather than one of the many minor double dies or machine doubling effects that can sometimes look similar to untrained eyes, but are actually worth very little. Machine doubling, also called shelf doubling or strike doubling, occurs when the coin bounces or shifts slightly during the striking process, creating a doubled appearance that's actually quite different from true double die errors. Machine doubling typically shows a flat, shelf-like secondary image rather than a full, rounded second image. And it often appears on only one side of raised elements rather than creating a true separate doubled image. So learning to distinguish between these two types of doubling is essential for avoiding disappointment and correctly identifying genuine valuable errors. There are actually 3 different classes of double die recognized on 1972 D pennies, with the Class 1 variety being the $10 million coin we've been discussing, while Class 2 and Class 3 varieties show less dramatic doubling and are worth considerably less, typically $500 to $3,000 depending on condition. So not every double 1972 D is worth millions. But any doubling is worth checking carefully and having authenticated if it seems significant. The Class 1 variety is distinctive enough that experienced collectors can identify it instantly. But if you're new to this, don't try to self-diagnose. When in doubt, send it in for professional authentication, because the $75 to $150 cost of certification is absolutely trivial compared to the potential value. And even if it turns out to be a Class 2 or 3 or machine doubling or nothing special at all, you'll have peace of mind and you'll have learned something valuable about coin authentication that will help you in future searches. The 1972 D double die has achieved almost legendary status in the coin collecting community, frequently appearing on top 10 lists of most valuable modern coins and being featured in countless articles, videos, and reference books, which means there's excellent documentation available showing exactly what to look for. And I strongly encourage you to study these resources and familiarize yourself with what genuine specimens look like before you start searching through your pennies, because having that visual reference in your mind will make it so much easier to spot the real thing if you encounter it. The market for this coin remains incredibly strong despite the relatively higher number of known specimens compared to some other high-value errors. And this is because the coin checks all the boxes that serious collectors look for. It has dramatic eye appeal with that bold, obvious doubling that makes it a spectacular display piece. It has an interesting backstory involving the change in mint procedures. It's from a date that's still relatively common in circulation, so there's that thrill of the hunt factor. It has a long collecting history with decades of documented sales and public interest. And most importantly, it's a coin that even non-collectors can appreciate and understand because the error is so visible and dramatic. When explaining your collection to friends and family, being able to show them a coin where the doubling is obvious and impressive is so much more impactful than trying to explain subtle die cracks or minor variations that require expertise to appreciate. And this showpiece quality is something that elite collectors are willing to pay premium prices for, which helps explain why the top specimens command such extraordinary values. Looking toward the future, most numismatic experts expect the value of major double die cents like the 1972 D to continue climbing, driven by several factors. First, the supply is essentially fixed, with no more examples being produced and existing specimens occasionally being lost or damaged, creating an ever-shrinking supply. While at the same time, wealth inequality means there are more super wealthy collectors competing for the finest pieces, creating increased demand and the supply. Demand dynamics point toward continued price appreciation. Second, as the Lincoln Cent series itself becomes increasingly historical. It's now been over 115 years since the design was introduced in 1909. Interest in completing high-quality sets, including all major varieties, continues to grow, and the 1972 Doubled Die is absolutely essential for any serious Lincoln Cent collection, ensuring ongoing demand regardless of broader economic conditions. And third, modern marketing and media coverage have made the coin collecting hobby more accessible and popular than ever before, with YouTube channels like this one, online forums, social media groups, and mobile apps, making it easier for people to learn about valuable coins and connect with other collectors, which is bringing new participants into the market and creating additional demand pressure that supports higher prices across the board. So whether you're searching for these coins as an investment, hoping to strike it rich, as a hobby because you enjoy the hunt and the history, or simply because you want to be more aware of what passes through your hands every day, taking the time to examine your 1972 Pennies is absolutely worthwhile. And who knows, you might just be the next person to discover one of these $10 million treasures hiding in plain sight. And with that, we've completed our journey through four of the most incredible valuable pennies in existence. The 1971 1 cent worth $109 million, the 1978 1 cent worth $49 million, the 1982 1 cent worth $28 million, and the 1972 1 cent worth $10 million. And if you've watched all the way to the end, you now have the knowledge and the tools you need to potentially discover one of these life-changing coins yourself. Remember, these coins are out there. They're real. They've been found by regular people just like you. And there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't be the next person to make a discovery that changes your life forever. So please, take what you've learned here today, apply it to your penny searches. Check your change carefully. Invest in basic tools like a decent scale and magnifier. And never stop hunting because you never know when that next penny you receive might be your ticket to fortune. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content about rare and valuable coins, and leave a comment below telling me about your own coin finds or asking questions about anything I've covered today. I read every comment, and I love hearing from fellow treasure hunters. Now get out there and start checking those pennies. And remember, fortune favors the prepared, the knowledgeable, and the persistent. So happy hunting, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll be exploring even more incredible rare coins that could be hiding in your pocket right now.